Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Man Talk podcast. This is episode 36. I'm with Jacob again. Today, we're talking about systems and specifically developing future systems for each other, ourselves, and our lives so that we can better navigate our mid 30s and early 40s. So, this is more like a 5 to 10 year strategizing plans, essentially. You can think of a system, just to get our terms straight, as any methodical approach to something that you want to try to accomplish. Oh, you want to make money in the stock market? Maybe you need a system to help guide that. Oh, you need to pay off debt? Maybe you need a system to cut down the interest and to minimize your accrual of interest over time. So that's sort of the high level of what we're going to talk about. Um, Jacob, do you have any other comments before we dive in?
Yeah, so for all these systems that we're doing, instead of getting caught off guard as things change rapidly in our 30s, in the event that happens, we're trying to take some precautionary measures to what systems will we want to have and dialed in as we go into this. So now we've already got a predetermined target before we actually get there. And that's going to be awesome because in the event we spent time on it now, the payoff would be radically higher. And then whoever we're with in our particular social group or in our family relationships, we already had that stuff put in place from the start versus trying to figure it out while everything's all mishmashed together. So that's the main origins for at least me for why I wanted to do the podcast.
Great. So first, I'm going to talk briefly about some abstractions of systems, and then we can dive into some examples. Um, for me, based off of my readings and how I live my life, any good system has a degree of self-awareness, risk assessment, and a concept known as anti-fragility built into it. So I'm going to start with anti-fragility because that's actually a pretty powerful concept that not too many people are aware of. It's based off of a book by the same name. I forget the author off the top of my head, but essentially, most systems in place, most structures in place for that matter, are fragile, meaning that they're not necessarily built to last and they don't take into consideration like problems, right? So the example of this could have been the 2008 subprime mortgage scare, where people were taking out loans they couldn't pay off. It was a very fragile system, and it fell apart because there weren't mechanisms in place to prevent the breakdown. So a little closer to home, an anti-fragile system would look something like, oh, okay, well, I know these are the problems that are going to happen. How do I fortify my defenses against those problems so they don't destroy everything I've worked towards? So, one example is minimizing debt, right? So, if you take on too much debt for yourself, then you're in a fragile position if you lose your job because you're still on the hook for that debt. So, a good way to fortify yourself against, just becoming extremely poor, have to create or have to go into bankruptcy, is to pay off your debt and moreover not have any debt incurred that is not financially salvageable. So there is forms of good debt, but that would be integrated into more of a holistic plan to try to remediate them. And then very quickly on self-awareness and risk assessment. So taking into account the fortifying yourself against problems, you have to take a risk assessment. So any good system has a risk assessment of good and bad degrees of risk. You can have higher risk and you can have lower risk. Personally, I'd recommend minimizing the risks as much as possible, which sounds self-evident, but depending on your tolerance for risk, you might be more inclined to have a high or heavy risk uh, load that you're willing to take on because you believe that the gains are much outweigh the potential risks that you might have. So that could be in like investments or stocks. And then self awareness. So, in terms of self awareness, that's just having the knowledge to know that either you don't know something, you need to ask for help, not having enough, uh, or having too much hubris to the point where you're blinding yourself from potential risks or uh, situations where things could collapse your entire life, and just knowing where you want to see yourself in a decade, right? Just having that planned out methodically and with a little bit of self-deference to be like, okay, well, obviously I don't know what the next decade's going to be, but these are the steps I can take to make sure that I get close to that outcome.
So the good news with a lot of these things, we're trying to put places and different methodologies together such that regardless of situation, you're going to put yourself in the best case scenario. So in
Correct.
some of these self-awareness things that Julian's talking about, diet and exercise, we brought that up on different parts of the podcast. What systems do we have now that we prefer, and what other systems are we going to need? So for me, I've actually got something on that. So I used to be a cyclist in Davis, but after moving to other parts of California, which aren't exactly as bike friendly, or I just ran out of space. Um, I'm not as cyclist available. I can't do this. I'm not in the same mindset I was in Davis, where you could just lock your bike and they have the nice L block where you could just take your U-lock and put it together. So in the future, though, I would like to get back into it. So one of the things to keep myself healthy is to have an indoor cycling uh, manifold. So I'll put my road bike on it. I'll have a kicker stand, KIKR, and I want to use an app called Zwift. And what the whole point behind Zwift is you can see yourself virtually biking, and you've got all these other people that are on the app doing that. So I thought that would be a cool exercise system I do not have yet that I would like to do with other people, and it would be a good way to maintain accountability. So regardless of what time of day it is, I can call up any of the friends that I may have in my 30s and be, hey, do you want to go for a bike ride at 8 o'clock? Maybe you want to go at 7:30. Okay. And then we'll all go biking together on our Zwift app, basically. And that's a bomb concept I learned from a global triathlon network. These guys actually use it to train. And that's cool because in the event of COVID, let's say this happens again. Let's say for some reason 2025 comes around and all of these calamities happen where we have to shelter in place and the economy takes a dump, and we're once again in a situation where we are now in 2020. We already have a system to be able to maintain accountability and to maintain relationships with these people that we hold dear. And I want to use it for family as well. So that way, as my family gets older and older, I have a means to hold them accountable, so that way we can all do something together virtually. And they got something for a treadmill for the running aspect. But I personally like the bike one, mainly because it's safer. So you can just be on the kicker stand and just bike in place. So that's one of the things I want to talk about for a future system that specifically to me, that would be of importance. Julian, for the self-awareness part of this, so the healthy living and intentional living, what kind of future system would you want to have?
Yeah, so essentially, for in terms of self-awareness, for myself personally, in the next 5 or 10 years, I would want to develop a system where I have checks and balances on my actions, meaning like, okay, like your example of Swift, you have an accountability aspect built into it. So for self-awareness, it'd be like asking your friends who are close to you, near and dear, okay, hey, am I being like ridiculous right now? Or is what I'm doing making sense? Like, for example, say in the future I want to buy a brand new car with a 5.6% APR loan or whatever, which is a little ridiculous. But the point of contention would be, okay, is that financially wise? And then I'd ask my peers, like, no, that's pretty stupid. You're going to accrue a lot of interest on a $50,000 loan. Why would you do that? And then similarly, just knowing enough to ask around, hey, are all these moves that I'm going to do, like, do, these, do they make sense, or are they just like nonsense, or you're just being impulsive, right? So I would want to further develop that sanity check, as I'll describe it. That, okay, well, all my friends say this is bad, therefore I shouldn't do it. And I don't necessarily have this now. I just kind of do my own research and do my own thing. But in my slow forte into, getting people's opinions on things and going away from more of an isolationist mindset, it's actually saved a lot of time in the couple years that I've done it to, like, okay, what's the best car to get, or best used car, so that I minimize the amount of repairs and maximize the reliability of the car. It may not be the 2020 model car with all the bells and whistles, but at least I'm saving money and it's not breaking down and costing more than a $40,000 initial investment. So that's just one example for self-awareness, checking with my peers and seeing if I'm being illogical.
And that's a good one to have. I mean, if you don't have that in your 30s, especially as families become more common, marriages become more common, and the interactions between different groups, the last thing we're going to want to have is that isolation mindset that, okay, our family's going to do this and everybody else is just going to do their own thing. And that's actually a big mistake for a lot of people that are doing this right now. They just want to have their one home and their one family, and anyone else can hang out with them, but they can't tell them what to do. And I'd say for advice, you're going to want people who sincerely say, hey, 5.6 APR loan, 72 months on a $50,000 or $50,000 car. Are you kidding me? It makes sense that you want to have people that can actually check your particular decisions. And so many people right now just say, well, if that's what you want, go ahead, just do it. And it sucks because that's not the advice you need when you actually are asking for it. So having that system of relationships that sanity check you, and so that way you can do the same for them in the event that they're in a jam. So
Right. And then also vetting your friends or peers' advice, cross-checking it against what you learned in your own life, your own values, your own morals. It's best to get a diverse range of opinions to see, okay, well, this guy happened to take out that super expensive loan and he made it work, but he had crippling like deficits in his salary. Whereas this guy bought the used car, it didn't, since it was a reliable brand, they didn't have to spend as much money to maintain it, so it worked out in that case. Didn't look as nice, but from a, what do you prioritize? Do you prioritize your savings, or you prioritize your aesthetics, your image? And that's more of a personal choice, to be frank, because I personally prefer savings and prioritizing, like accumulating financial wealth. Other people, on the other hand, may prioritize how they look and what image they want to portray to their peers. Both could have their pros and cons as long as you methodically think it out and are self-aware of, okay, what's the cost? Everything has a cost, and then you just have to take that risk assessment to be like, okay, do I want to pay this cost to have this $50,000 car and portray this certain image? Some people maybe, some people maybe.
Depending on who you are too, but for what it's worth, getting to the next part of the podcast for the layout of our lives. So we've talked about some things already about diet, exercise, getting the right relationships so that way you're on stable ground. We're doing some other things in the financial sector that have been good for our lives. So for example, I've got an inventory system to keep track of my items. I also have a budget system that's all done on Excel, so I can see the inputs and outputs of as far as income versus expenses. And then it's delineated by all the different types of expenses, and I can see which one is taking up the most. And usually housing is the one that takes up the most, so you just deselect that, and then you actually can see on the even playing field, oh, okay, I'm spending way too much on, let's say it's online expenses. Okay, why is that? And if I can't come up with a justifiable reason, or I would say multiple reasons, because maybe one is just a cop out, I'm doing something incorrect and I need to course correct. Maybe I need to find out, okay, well, why do I need this much? And if it turns out something like a COVID year, okay, that explains why it went up. Is there anything we should do for next year's budget so that way we can account for this next time? Because in my 30s, I don't want that to happen. I don't want things to just get out of control, finances wise. I want it to be not to the point where everything's in a box, but allow for enough contingency to realistically think, okay, so we've had problems in the past where I need to have a plus or minus, let's say, like $2,000 window on a particular expense line per year. Okay, well, let's put that in, and maybe as we can use that as a scaling factor for as things get more complicated with either family life or friends life or whatever. So another thing that we were going to dive into was the home layout that we want to have. So Julian, did you have anything that you wanted to start us off with, or did you want me to continue on?
Sure. So, like Jacob, I created an inventory, but specific to all of my electronics. Because over the last decade, I've created an inventory, or I bought a lot of different electronics and wanted to know the actual cost value, so that in case of some disaster that strikes my house, I can just present the insurance people the list of things that I've had, and then they could figure out the depreciation of the assets. So without that inventory spreadsheet, that layout, I'm not aware. I don't know what I stand to lose. And after tallying all the numbers, it's like, oh, this is quite a significant cost that I've incurred over the last decade. I wouldn't be aware of it unless I went through the process and then methodically kept track of every single electronic purchase above a certain amount. Um, so any sort of inventory system in general, as long as it's straightforward and utilizes spreadsheet software, is probably in your best interest, whether it be tracking your electronics like I do, tracking your finances and budgets, or just tracking, credentials or where you plan to see yourself year in, year out. You can plan out, if you desire, the next 25 years of your life, which year do you want to hit certain metrics, certain targets. And just sitting down and really thinking to yourself, oh, this is how I'm going to do it, or this is the goals I want, and then fleshing out the details, and this is how I'm going to do it. In terms of structuring my room, I use the tub system. So in the tub system, it has different clothes, obviously, like any dresser or cupboard. And then each clothing article is subcategorized by weather. So if it's cold or hot, then those get clumped together. And then it's structured in such a way where highest priority stuff's on the top shelves, and then as you go down, it's more of a low priority. I don't really use this as much. And then I can just grab and pick and choose the things I need for the given uh, season and summer. And then it's also compartmentalized away, so I don't have to think about it. It doesn't take up much room. In terms of placement of items in my room, I have a lot of shelves and tables scattered about, but I know where each item is, so that if I need to get like a tire pump, I know which cubby to pull from because it's systematized in such a way where, oh, all the tools are in this sector of the room, and then short of memorizing the layout of where all the tubs are, there's labels on the tubs so that I know, okay, it's in the tools box with all the other bike supplies that I have. So it's really, at least for me, I've decided to break down where things are utilizing a shelf and tub system, and then everything's labeled clearly so I know where everything is.
So going into further developments into maybe a house you want to have in a few years, at least for mine own sake, I can't wait for the garage aspect because that's where a lot of the stuff, as far as keeping utility items outside of the house. It's always hard to keep a house clean, so you're going to want to keep a lot of the dirtier stuff in more of a garage setting. You already have your car there. Cars aren't necessarily clean. Makes sense for it to go there. Stuff that's not necessarily temperature controlled necessary. Does it need to be temperature controlled, like in an air conditioned room? All that stuff could go over there. in terms of a kitchen, that's going to be really important because as your family life develops, you're going to want to be able to have something robust. If you've got, let's say, two kids running around, and you've also got maybe your parents have to live with you for a time, and you've got your wife, and all these different people that are living in the same house, you need to be able to have a system that can support all of that. I can't use my apartment setup to do that. It needs to be bigger. So maybe one cast iron skillet's not going to do it. Maybe I'm going to need two or three in order to be able to make food at the same time I'm making now. And maybe that's not enough. Maybe I'll need a grill outside. So that way, if I was going to do the same kind of meal but upscale it for the family, that could all be done with multiple parts. So in the case of a grill, that would be also a way to extend more cooking space outside if I'm maxed out on my kitchen space. So some things to consider for those systems have been definitely upgrading the kitchen, the garage, and the bathroom. Because also for the bathroom, I'm not going to want to have a house that has less than 2.5 bath. Mainly because that's going to be your cleaning area. You don't want to just have one. If you just have one, your whole system for your entire family is stuck on that one bathroom. That's going to be your cycle time limiter. You want to be able to have enough where people can come in and out and it's not affecting how you're trying to get to work and your wife's in there and then the kids are in there. It's a bad system. You want to be able to have everyone have enough time to get ready every day. And that's actually something Jordan Peterson brings up with every day, the stuff you do every day, that's the stuff that matters because that's where all the extra time and effort's going to go into that you're constantly doing. So you want to optimize that as fast as you possibly can. So in the case of a house, having those additional bathrooms, that's not necessarily a luxury. That's actually going to be a big thing on cycle time. So you're not always delayed by that, waiting for somebody. And in the case of the kitchen, you don't have to worry about people getting hungry and you're not having to take 90 minutes to make a meal every day. So those are some systems I was thinking about in my home later in the next few years. And then it really puts you in a position of power to be able to facilitate and maintain your family. And then everyone's going to be happy. And then you're not always going back to your home in the sense of, well, I just have to do this and I have to go make dinner and I have to clean up. Instead, it's I get to go home. I get to see my wife. I get to see my family. And then I get to make them dinner. And we get to have a good time over in the living room and just enjoy life for once. So some other things I wanted to have for the home, I want to have a dog eventually. So right now I do pack walks, but I would love to do the pack walk with a dog. And I want to have a dog for security reasons and for psychological health. They have a tendency to always like you when you come home. That is a big win. Not everyone's happy to see you when you're going through your family life. So that's been something I've really been thinking about at one point that I want to have. And then you've got a dog that also helps out with the family psychological health, not just you. So it's a way for everyone to kind of cheer up because they've got a pet. And it also helps to have some security and a walking buddy. So those are some systems I want to have to maintain some good psychological health and be winning in the family struggles instead of always being dragged down by them. That's a common complaint I keep hearing from people about why they don't want to have a family. So in the event the system's in place, family can actually be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to it if that's the way it's going to go down. But until then, it makes sense to build up to this system first before laying people down on it so I can actually support this as opposed to it being a chore.
Yeah, and then a benefit of, spending some time to think about how you want to structure your house, what appliances you want in the kitchen, in the living room, in your bedroom, and just the layout of where everything is. It's very critical in terms of structuring your room and all the rooms in your house in such a way where not only it's aesthetically pleasing to you, but functionally everything works the way it's intended. So in terms of functionality, personally, I prefer buying appliances that have multi-use functionality. So it's not just like one use and that's it. You only So, for example, of this, uh, in terms of an appliance, I would get like a pressure cooker, which I just recently invested in. And with a pressure cooker, you can create like numerous amounts of meals, and it expedites the process from a normal conventional oven. You can cook like rice, meats, steamed vegetables. You can do all these different things with just one item. Or I don't have this yet, a juicer. With a juicer, you can develop a strategy to make juices, make smoothies, even make yogurt that you may not initially make if you lacked the ability to have a blender and just combine all the things. So, like in terms of health, right? A juicer is a great option because if you go to like Costco and you get a bunch of berries and you get a bunch of vitamins and all this stuff, you can just throw it, make little blended health drink, and then the sum of the parts of the things you add in are all adding up to this super nutritious drink that you create and dial into your own taste. I mean, Jacob, with your pressure cooker and blender, you can attest to this, right?
Speaking my language, he even said Costco in there. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's my system. Go in the grocery store, pick up that stuff. One stop shop. You've got your meats that are rather thick, so you can't really use a skillet for that unless you want to burn the crap out of the surface and not get anywhere in the middle. So you got to find a way to be able to cook the whole thing. Pressure cookers are great for the thick meats. The blender is fantastic for someone who doesn't like fruits and vegetables because you can find a way to make it taste good nonetheless, and you can still get those nutrients in there. Now, granted, I would say there's plenty of people who would say, oh, I'd rather just eat them plain. Fair enough. I used to do the same thing, but the fact that it got me to eat fruits and vegetables regularly is the win, and that's why I got it. Was
yeah.
to have that system.
There's a consistency aspect to any successful system where it feeds into itself and it doesn't fall apart from disuse. A successful system is one where the mechanism that keeps perpetuating it is the functionality behind it, I would argue. So like a blender, obviously a good enough blender, you want to eat all of these fruits and vegetables that you normally wouldn't have on their own. So what's the feedback loop that you're getting? The positive feedback loop? Oh, well, I can combine all these into one and get everything all at once. And then the only like drawback is, oh, maybe I have to clean this one thing.
You gotta
But
clean. That's true. You gotta
but
clean.
the potential upside outweighs whatever the cleaning drawback it would be. You'd be healthier, it's easy, it's quick. You don't have to wait that long, you get a nutritious meal.
Keep in mind though, you do have to put up the investment for it. And a lot of people, they say, well, I do want it. And then they come to find out that, no, I don't want to clean it. And then it turns into this system that they don't use. And then it's just a monument to their financial burden, so to speak. Because it's just, okay, great. I bought this rather slick blender that I don't use because I don't want to clean it. Or I forget about it or whatever. That's not why you should buy it. It definitely see what other people have for their systems as far as their appliances. I'd recommend seeing them in action first, or hear their experiences out, such that before you do anything as far as an investment, you've seen its demonstrated capacity, and that's really bomb. Julian had a really good point, by the way, about making sure the room has functionality. So when you walk into it, you know what to do. Jordan Peterson was talking about that in his description of Rule 6 about making sure your room is set up that people know what to do. You walk in, it's the system is already in place. And for the kitchen, I mean, it's nice to be able to just walk in. There's the blender. It's right next to the refrigerator where all the stuff is going to be as far as frozen and fresh vegetables and fruit. Put it all in, put it in the base liquid, and that really is handy for the diet aspect. That's something that we can't afford to continue to neglect in our 30s. And I know we said that earlier, but we really can't afford to anymore. The price we're going to pay if we don't is that we're going to get older, we're going to get busier, and we're not going to do it if we don't have the system in place. And then it's just for 20 years, you probably won't do it. And it's not the end of the world, but it's definitely going to make life harder. I mean, joint pains, that already is going to happen. So we got to find ways to, maybe we got to put some ginger in the diet to help out with that. If we start getting higher cholesterol for some reason, or we're getting higher stress levels, which is stressing our particular bodies, maybe we can come up with a system of actual drinks to be able to help out with that. So it's really paying for it on the front end. That's what we're trying to get at with this podcast today. What can we do in the front end to make sure the next part of the mid game of life really is setting us up for success? So that way, when we're in our 70s, if we even make it, we're actually still ready to go. We're doing fine. When Julie and I were in Davis, we saw all these old people that were just in perfect shape. They're biking, they're swimming, they're running. To me, I'm going, what the heck? I've never thought people in their 70s could do this. People in their 80s can do this. I was absolutely excited because they're the proof of concept. So
Yeah,
all
they
these
chose. Yeah, they chose to live an intentional lifestyle. Isn't that a way of framing it?
and they had enough things happen to them in their systems where they were able to navigate properly. Now, granted, not everyone gets that luxury. A lot of people get their lives screwed up by external forces. So it's good to have these systems to fend those off. So I'd also recommend some other equipment for that reason as well, in the finances world. So now that we're talking more about finances in this part of the podcast, what systems we would want to have to maintain some kind of return on investment where we're not just determined that the job is going to be all of our income. Julian, you probably got some thoughts on this. So let's hear you first.
Yeah, so I've been doing more research into financial investments within the last year or so, and a lot of this is heavily influenced by what I've read and what my peers are doing. And the main thing is investments aren't the main driver of your income. That's definitely still your job, and you need to keep getting paid higher salaries from your job across your career. If you find yourself stagnating, then you have to really consider, okay, why am I here and why am I not chasing that earnings potential? Because if you're not making enough money, there's no amount of investing into the stock market or anything like that that's going to pay for itself or pay for your lifestyle choices. You just have to get a higher paying job. But say you got your higher paying job, what do you do with all this extra income? You don't necessarily just let sit in a high interest savings account, which is a good first step. Maybe you want a higher return on investment. In that case, you would look into stocks, look into ETFs, look into what investments you can get such that you make a healthy 3 to 7% return each year on your money. It's just not depreciating due to what's that term? Due to inflation. So, doing your due diligence and research into your financial options is very key to this. But that should only come after you have a good job and have enough income to sustain yourself, have your 6 to 12 month emergency fund, and then after that, having the strategy to be like, okay, well, how do I make my money work for me rather than just kind of sit and stagnate?
So what we've also been talking about, besides the high interest bank accounts and investing, is how to invest specifically. So there's a lot of different options. I mean, Julian already mentioned ETFs. You mentioned the high interest savings account. But I would recommend finding a way to pick your proper IRAs, whether it's Roth or regular. I'd recommend actually doing a mix of both. But some people don't necessarily want to do that. Some people just want to do a 401k and a Roth only. And that's plenty already in some regards. But for me, I want to have a future system where I've got all three of them. So 401, IRA, and a Roth. But I don't have that yet, but I am working towards it such that I can get towards the minimum fees for having those kind of accounts like Vanguard. That's actually one of the coolest things I've been able to find on Reddit was them talking up Vanguard. There's other ones like Schwab and Oppenheimer funds or whatever, but or Merrill Lynch. That's another good one. If you wanted to be convenient with Bank of America, but I was looking at some of them and their fees are just radically higher because there's more active monitoring. But then you find out the active monitoring isn't really helping you per se. So I would almost rather have it done myself for a lesser fee if I know I just need to let the money sit there. So when I found that out, I'm going, well, heck, what's up with all this monitoring if they don't even really care? Okay, well, let's see if we can do something about that. So maybe with a little more reading, I'll be able to do the traditional IRA, transfer some money over there, and then start having something that's more in my control without it being anything else. So for what it's worth, I'd say the Roth IRA is bomb just because of the tax benefits later. Usually taxes go up. That's what you're betting on. So that's something that I've been trying to go for in the meantime.
Nice.
What else do you got, Julian, as far as finances go? Or do you have any other systems you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, so in terms of speaking to the different strategies or systems for your finances, you have to decide which money that you're willing to part with if you're going to do like more high risk investments, because it's not necessarily guaranteed in any regard that, oh, I'm going to put in this amount of money and then this amount of money is going to come out. You have to systematize it better in such a way that, okay, here's the risk profile of these investments. How long am I going to keep it in here? 1, 3, 5, 20 years? And then essentially do due diligence to make sure that, okay, well, if I'm doing it extremely short term, the risk is going to be significantly higher, and I have to be willing or okay to go that route. Or like Jacob was talking about with retirement accounts, you don't necessarily want to incur too much risk later on in the retirement account, so you'd load up on more bonds and low risk options. But maybe early on, you would want to use that as a aggressive growth tactic to try to maximize your income when you're young, when you can incur more risk. But obviously, when you're a lot older and you're about to retire in your 60s, you would want to flip your strategy such that, oh, it's a little more conservative. I just need to keep my money there so that it sustains itself and not depreciates in the next crash. So it ultimately depends on where you are in your life. Are you young? Okay, go aggressive. It's probably okay. Are you older? Don't go aggressive. Not okay. You might lose all your precious money,
And that just
especially when you.
happened. That just happened with COVID. There's so many people that came out of the woodwork and they're going, yeah, I'm about to retire in 5 years. And then, oh, I was going to switch that stuff. I didn't switch it in time. And now they've got all these gains that were lost in just 1 year. Wouldn't be a big deal if it was averaged over a long period of time. They don't have a long period of time anymore. So the edges of this curve are where it really matters. Like that last 5 years before you actually need this money versus the first 5 years where you don't need it at all and it just needs to grow, grow, grow. And then as you get towards this middle sector, you kind of want to go just for a line, just up and down here, where you're doing some risk, but not trying to go for every startup within the financial sector. So,
Yeah, exactly. So the main, the big idea, the takeaway is know where you are in your life and what risk you can incur on your finances and how much time you're allotting yourself for recovery in case bad things happen, like COVID or any of the recessions that are gonna happen in the future.
so other things that we want to talk about for future systems. Did you want to talk about the data, or did you want to talk about maybe some more of that automated finances tracking that you were mentioning?
They kind of go hand in hand. So for automated tracking of data, or finances specifically, everybody's bank accounts can spit out statements, and you can track that data and gauge where how much money you're spending over time. So, for example, I think I talked about this before. I use Mint, So Mint, you can track all your retirement accounts and all your financial accounts. As long as it has login information, you can use Mint, and then it'll just plot your spending habits in graphs. You can also just download your data raw from your bank accounts and then input that into a spreadsheet software, which I know that you do. Um, the phases of automation kind of depend on how invested you are in knowing the nitty gritty details of each expense. And we've talked about this in the financial podcast of our different personal strategies. I believe Jacob's is more minute detail. Mine's more of a say general picture. Oh, like okay, I'm allotting like $200 or $300 a month for groceries. The actual purchases don't necessarily matter as much as being within that boundary. Whereas Jacob is okay, I've spent this much. I'm going to create the graphs and metric. How can I lower the general trend?
Or
Pretty
maintain.
similar.
Or maintain. Sometimes it's not always about lowering. Sometimes it's okay. I hit the $200 to $300 a month mark for groceries. Can I maintain this? Do I need to put in more contingency for the next time? Can I justify that as a higher expense? And that you saw that happen this year as meat prices went up and other things. So that actually there was a contingency factor built into the 2020 budget, and I'm like, yes, I get to actually see how durable it is in a year like 2020. So that's actually more of what I was going for with that budget. So it's not just here's your rigid, minute budget that you can't do anything
Yeah,
with and you can't
def-
go anywhere.
definitely you don't want your lifestyle to be rigid or punitive. You want to structure things in such a way where you can still have, your fun items. So, for example, every year, say you meet your metrics for how much you want to save, you should also include either a monthly or yearly like allotment, a budget for fun items, things that are outside of your necessities. So in my case, I like going on trips, so I always save a little bit aside to allow me to go on these trips and work that into my budget. And then it's the that process of just being methodical with your thought in terms of okay, well, I need this much for travel, this much for savings, this much for food, to the point where okay, well, everything's working for you rather than everything's unknown or worse working against you.
So that's what we were talking about with some of these budget systems. And I think it was podcast 22 where we put a lot of this together and we got to see the different budget types. And that's all referenced under that podcast. But it was good to talk about some of these other things again, as far as fund money. People don't always like doing that, but then they'll overspend. It's well, okay, allocate some for fund money. But what about the plus or minus on particular life expenses? So, or investments in my case. So, life investments for upgrading the kitchen. Is that important? Okay, well, if it is, put it in and just take a hit on the savings. Don't feel like you have to go to this narrow budget and you just have to push as much as you can so you can get your maximum amount of savings. That's not exactly what you want your budget to do. It's more of a vehicle to get you where you want to go. So lifestyle's included, savings are included, but also what it's going to do. You can save $1 million, but what are you going to do with it? I think that's actually more of a better question when you're making
Yeah.
budgets.
Also, in that mindset, in our mid 30s, we hope to both buy houses and start investing in our houses. But maybe what if we, for whatever reason, get jobs that require us to move around, right? Well, you're taking out that loan, you're expected to pay back that loan. But if you're in like a housing growth cycle, you could live in a desirable area where you know that the rate of your house, like its net worth, is going to go up. So maybe you're going to sell your house, right? Are you going to sell? Would you prefer to live in a area where you're selling at a loss in a potential downturn for whatever reason, or hopefully in a valuable enough area where all the money you put in is paying the mortgage, but your house is still accruing real world value once you're ready to sell it. So when you do sell it, you're paying off your original loan, but you actually made money because the value of your home also increased. So you didn't necessarily lose anything, right? paying into the equity, but you're also, um, it's an investment, obviously. So some areas of the country, housing costs are a lot more valuable. So that's a more, uh, it makes more sense to just, instead of necessarily paying rent all your life, you're paying towards something that's going to accrue value.
So you can do it that way, but if you end up where, okay, I've got to travel more, and that might be just because of what's going on with just world politics that impacts our job market. Let's say for some reason that has to happen. There's some people who are fine with just not doing the house thing altogether. Now, I would say for me, this is like plan C. This is probably down the list pretty far. Definitely plan A is having a place to call home, having stable friendships and relationships that are around in the city that I'm familiar with. But in the event that's not the case and life turns a completely different corner and we get sideswiped, maybe a house isn't necessarily what needs to happen. But what you should do is, okay, I'm not paying a mortgage. I'm not going to get a return on investment on a house. Don't just let the money sit there. It's got to go somewhere. Make sure it's a vehicle still for getting some kind of return on investment. Some people say the house thing's kind of overrated anyway, because let's say you sold it, yeah, you get one big lump sum at the end, but all that effort and all the opportunities you had to miss because your budget was so high to keep that mortgage going. So, and then the other people would say, well, you spent a lot of money on rent. Because that's true, but the people who own a home probably spend a lot of money on interest. So there's definitely there's pros and cons. You should really do the analysis yourself. And I did that last year to see, okay, is a house worth it right now? And turns out, yeah, the renting was cheaper. And I go, that makes sense. Who do you see more in apartments? People who are probably trying to like not blow a lot of money on housing. It makes sense. But for some people, they need to have the bigger living space. So it's something that you're going to have to figure out for yourself. But see the interest, see those potential pitfalls that you might run into before just deciding to buy a house altogether. Because it's a big investment. I mean, a lot of people, they're depressed after buying it because they go nuts. All these things I wanted to do, the systems I wanted to have, are now cut short because I have to take care of this house and property. And great things to keep in mind for a future system for how you want to live in the event that homes are going to change in the next 10 years. So far, it seems like in America, we still would rather have our own home, but that's something to consider when thinking about investment in property.
Right. You have to take that risk assessment and properly analyze, oh, can I actually afford this house? Is this fit with what lifestyle I want to do? Or is it more like keeping up with the Joneses and just trying to save face amongst your peers who also have families, who also have homes, who are also in chronic debt? Do you want to follow the herd in that scenario? Probably not.
Yeah,
Your
probably not, man.
your choices should be informed and ultimately your own. And as much as you can get swept away by other people's choices and by branding and all this other stuff, you should still put in the due diligence to arrive at the conclusion yourself that this is exactly what you want to do, and then lay out um, your methodology, your system as to why you want to do it.
So I think we've only got one more system for the time we've got left, Julian, and that's on organizing the digital space.
Yes.
Getting that all together. We talked about space in the home, but what about the digital space? Did you have any way of organizing a lot of your documents, or was that not really a priority?
Definitely for me, I have a lot of digital items, be it videos, photos, what have you. So the simplest way that I found is just consolidating everything into a folder structure on one or two hard drives. So the reason why you'd have two is because you want to have redundancy in your system so that if one hard drive fails, you have a backup on the other hard drive. You can do this with different disk management software to set it up in a RAID formation such that you have redundancy. redundancy is key in the digital space. So, for example, if one of your hard drive fails, you have the extra one for the RAID formation. But if you only have it in one place and there's a giant earthquake or flood and none of that data is backed up online, well, what happens to it? It's lost forever. So having an online resource like Box or Google Drive or OneDrive, any of those would be perfectly acceptable places as long as you're willing to, have the fast enough internet connection, upload it there, and remember the passwords and all the stuff. So in terms of organizing the folder structure, I usually do it by month and year. So I have like the year, I delineate it by, oh, okay, I did everything for photos, videos, what have you, for 2011. So I have a photo folder, a video folder, and then documents, and then within those folders, a logical substructure. And this is consistent each year. So 2020 all the way down to 2010, when I started this, you have a photos, videos, documents, and then within those subfolders, you have, for me in my case, since I do paid work, I have all the paid stuff delineated by the project or wedding I filmed, and then all the creative stuff as well is delineated. And then for personal documents, it's usually broken down by taxes or schoolwork. Now that I'm in my late 20s, there's a new investments folder that's added into the documents as well. So as my life is changing, the general structure is consistent and makes sense with where I am at my life, and it's easy to find everything.
Okay, so yours is more of the here's your fiscal, here's the 12 months within that fiscal, and then you're going to find all your stuff as far as videos, documents, and then the documents folder is further delineated too.
Right.
For me, I've actually got just an archive system. So most of the stuff that I want to get to is just the current stuff. So like for budget and inventory, why would I care about my inventory from 2018 as much as I would care about what I have currently? So all I do is have an archive folder within that subfolder of budget and inventory, and then throw it in. That way, I'm always seeing right up front when I click budget and inventory, that's my most current one. And then if I want to see old ones, let's say for some reason a fire breaks out and I didn't save, I overwrote my Excel file to prove to the insurance man that, hey, I actually had all this stuff. Well, I still have the archive of the last save in that archive file, which is all I would really want to have. But if they wanted further proof, I could just show them the whole archive file. And you could see everything all in one column. So in the event I need to show it to them fast, it's not like, look, I didn't just do this, in one willy-nilly Excel file, typed it up all night and shared it with you. It's no, I've been doing this for years because I actually bought this stuff. Here's some more proof with Amazon. Here's all that lined out for you. Here's all this stuff that I bought through other sources on the other parts of the Google Drive. And then it's way more believable with photos, Amazon, just multiple cross references. I think that's probably the best way to think about it for saving documents for that reason. But besides budget and inventory, I've got other things as far as journaling. So again, I don't want to have a journal from every month. I just want to put that into one file. And then because Word files aren't that big, you can just see it all in one place. So that's how it's more on my Google Drive, whether it be journaling or for important documents. It's all put into different categories as far as whether it's journaling, inventory, maintenance, medical, all that's put in as well.
Yeah, and my last point on that is just that the reason why I like the fragmentation between the separate files is because I can time and place each file appropriately, and then if that one file gets corrupted, which has happened before, I don't lose everything. So having the redundancies, having everything separated out in its own unique thing, at least for me, I found with especially digital items, there might be a scenario where a file gets corrupted and then it's lost. So usually I have like 2 or 3 different backups of the same file, so that maybe if one file gets corrupted, the other three or two, and usually it's two, don't get corrupted.
Well, I'm glad you were able to share that with me because it's good to know how other people organize their stuff. Maybe there's something I can take away from that as far as fiscal year. We do at that same kind of method at work. So it's good to know that, okay, so keep in mind how you're going to organize stuff and help find it for later, especially for taxes. I could see for taxes fiscal year being a good way to organize that.
Yeah, and then having a general system of okay, archive folder versus all the stuff that I'm currently using. That's also an effective way to try to separate. Okay, I need this now. I needed this back in the day, but I might need it in the future.
So maybe a hybrid system might be a good choice depending on what you need it for. If you need to see it that specific in the archive.
Correct. Yeah.
So
Well, yeah. So I think that's it in terms of our talk on future systems. Did you want to add anything else, Jacob?
not really. We had something else to do with exposure therapy, but that'd be for another time.
Yep.
I think we were already talking about some of that with how we do our different systems already. Um,
Yep.
but it's been really good to put this all out there because I'm always looking at the future as this big black box and I don't know what to do with it. So this is definitely encouraging to me to see if we can come up with some strategies to get into the next stage of life and actually have a realistic target. It's hard to see it 25 years out because the extrapolation just looks completely off, especially as initial conditions change that extrapolation. So thanks again for doing this with me, Julian.
Yeah. No problem. Thanks, everyone.